Welcome, everybody. Happy Friday. Good morning still to me because coffee is still hot and good for me. This is episode 145 of Two Chaps. That's this guy and that guy, and many cultures. And today we'll have a third chap that will help us to talk a little bit about cultures. And he's been doing this video thing much, much longer than Brett and I have. So we are in awe by a true professional. And as we wrote in the introduction, in the tempest of xenophobia, this man is a rock, a solid rock of true American values. Stay tuned. Happy Friday, Brett.
Hey, how are you, mate? Oh, happy Friday to you. Really? No, to you.
Yes, to me. Yes, to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, this is the show of the culture of business and the business of culture, episode 145, and a beautiful Friday, wintry Friday here in good old US of A. Good old US of A, where we give you the tips and the tools to be the very best global leader or practitioner, whatever you want to do. And so
maybe you just want to fit in. Maybe you just want to work well in a new cultural context. And our guest today made that part of his business. He has a YouTube show that is also streaming or broadcasting locally in Michigan called Feel Like You Belong. And when I said he's a rock of true American values in a storm, in a tempest of xenophobia, I mean, he really embodies what we mean when we talk about the United States being a nation of immigrants, because he made it part of his mission to allow people that come to this country and make it their home to share their story about their journey of what it took for them to belong and how long it is probably still taking some of them to truly feel like they belong into this new place. So welcome to the program on this beautiful Friday from Grand Rapids, Michigan, Mr. Alan Headbloom. Thanks for joining us, Alan.
Well, good day, Brett, and guten Tag, Christian.
Wow, Tag. There you go. I feel like I belong already.
Brett, Feel Like You Belong. I probably butchered this explanation. What's the show about? Who watches it? Where does it air or stream or broadcast? And what made you do that?
So Feel Like You Belong airs locally on WKTV, Wyoming, Michigan, a suburb of Grand Rapids. And we also have our own website, so you can pick us up there and watch any of our past episodes. Everything's archived there at feellikeyoubelong.com. We also have our YouTube channel, Feel Like You Belong, and you can check us out there. And we always welcome feedback via those two media, just to give us suggestions or to ask questions.
Right. So who do you want to feel like they belong? Obviously, I mean, I triggered it a little bit. So you interview people who are not necessarily native to Michigan or to the US in general, and are transplants of some sort, and you extract their stories a little bit. Can you give us a little bit of a taste what that is, and what your mission behind those interviews was? Well, what prompted you to do that?
Well, first of all, I would say both you and Brett would be welcome guests on the show because you're originally not from here. And right. Having lived and worked and traveled and studied on 6 continents and learned lots of language, or learned poorly lots of languages, learned well 1 or 2 languages, I've been that fish out of water, and I really understand what it means to not fit in, not feel like you belong, to be just, perpetually uncomfortable. And of course, it gets worse as the day goes on, because as you get more tired, your second language or third language skills decline, and so then you're just babbling like like a moron by the end of the day. And I've worked again my whole career, traveled much of my life around, and the last 30 years I've been helping expats and immigrants adapt to life in the U.S., both linguistically. I have a background in applied linguistics, and culturally, cross-culturally. And so knowing the importance of fitting in, because I've had those same uncomfortable moments, I just really feel that extending that face of welcome, and more than just hello, how are you, I hope you feel good, is here are the some of the tricks of the trade, the rules of the road, teaching people the ropes. How do you get along in another place? What shaking hands or kissing or hugging or etc. How do you do things here that make you not stand out? So my life has been about this kind of intercultural hospitality. And then in January 2013, so now 8 years ago, my wonderful wife, who is bright and actually Christian, makes me think of your terrific partner, very much a red card holder on the bank scale. Very okay. Let's not talk about this. Let's not study this. Let's just jump in, do it, and figure it out as we go. And so she, as an action-oriented person, she said, "Honey, you're doing this really important work with people, but it's also, this is one-on-one coaching, small seminars. We need the world to hear about this fascinating stuff. Let's create a TV show." And I'm not terribly bright, but I am smart enough to listen to a wise woman who has big ideas. So the show was born. We got some interns from her department at the film and video production at the university. Started building sets, working with the local public access TV station. And again, shout out to WKTV. Brilliant folks, very professional, very helpful in getting local messages out to the world. And so we've been doing the show for 8 years now. We've interviewed probably 200 people. I just did a tally this morning in preparation for our conversation. People from 68 different countries from around the world. And since I've lived in places that aren't Europe or aren't English speaking, I really make an extra effort to how do we reach out to sort of underrepresented people? Because again, if you ask Americans, have you traveled? They said, well, yes, I've been to Europe. Well, I mean, if you look at us, our ancestors all came from Europe, and that's relative comfort zone. But who are the profound voices from the Middle East, from Pan Arabia? Who are the voices from Africa that we haven't heard from? Who are the Asian voices that we haven't heard from? So I make a real a strong effort to cover all of those bases and get all of those voices in. And then in addition to the interview, which is really getting those voices out and getting them heard, getting their stories heard, there's, I'm a teacher, there are other segments of the show where we focus on language and tips for newcomers, second language speakers, and how do you speak English better? What's, slang and pronunciation, grammar tricks, and those sorts of things.
Y'all can definitely check it out. feellikeyouBelong.com is the website. So make sure that it's 2 E's and 2 L's as you type it in. We can also put the link in the chat box later. I do want to check the boxes, though, as you said earlier, Alan. You said 68 countries, or people from 68 different countries were on your show.
Yes.
Obviously, we are being watched in other parts of the world as well. So as you're watching this either live or the recording, doesn't really matter. You see the scroll bar on the bottom of the screen where we're asking you to tell us where in the world you're watching this. So make sure you let us know what your home location is, and maybe if you're not living in your home location, let us know what's your home location, what is the host location in which you're currently located and watching this from. So let us know. We curious, inquisitive minds would like to know. So play with us a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, I'm deliberately not politicizing the question, and yet it will have some political connotation as I phrase it. So you've been doing this show for 8 years, and in these past 8 years, there in the United States, the state of Michigan was in the headlines as well, particularly around this topic around people that are originally from here or not from here. How has the reception of your mission, of your program, how has that changed, or did it change at all? Did you get pushback? Did people, I don't know, give you comments that you didn't really like about your program? I'm curious.
Great question. Universally, we get lots of love from the expat and immigrant and refugee community, because we're telling their stories and talking about the difficulties. And so for people like me, I'm third generation. My grandparents were immigrants, but you lose that connection with each succeeding generation. And so when you don't hear the stories from your parents, or don't even experience the struggles if your parents were the immigrant generation, then you really lose the sense of, gosh, it's profoundly hard to give up everything from the homeland and move to a different place where, you know, you have an accent, you sound funny, you dress funny, you eat funny. And so that sense of validating those stories of struggle and then ultimately success are really important to the immigrant community. But going forward, I really realized that Americans who are increasingly, with each generation, more distanced from the immigrant experience, they need to understand this. And I had probably one of my more profound moments. We get feedback both via our website and YouTube channel. And an 80-something-year-old white conservative viewer from Metro Detroit wrote in, and the first words in his note were, "We have an immigration problem," which, you know, often means, you know, not enough white folks, more brown and black folks moving here. He said, "But when I watch this show, I identify with these people as people." And actually, it was in response to an episode. We interviewed a now middle-aged man who, with his then girlfriend, now wife, walked from Guatemala the length of Mexico, which is not safe or advisable, and crossed over into Arizona without documents. They were robbed on their way across the border, and so entered this country both without documents and without a penny. Worked very hard, moved to Georgia for a while, worked there, where Christian is now, and then finally ended up in Michigan, worked for a factory. The factory went out of business, and he said, well, it's time to start my own business. And in the meantime, though, he and his wife got green cards. They're now citizens. And unlike the majority, if you walk into a coffee shop, or the next time you can safely walk into a coffee shop and take a poll of everyone in the room, how many people are responsible for signing the paycheck of a half a dozen local citizens? You know, most of us know, right? He's a small businessman. He has a janitorial service, and he's a jobs creator, right? And that's language from some political candidates of the past. So he's, you know, the American dream. Come here, nose to the grindstone, work hard, successful. Now his kids, he and his wife never finished high school, maybe didn't finish middle school. His kids, one's in community college, the other's about to start community college, and already raising the bar for the family expectations. And, you know, this is a perfect human success story, American dream story. And so this older conservative fellow wrote and said, well, we have an immigration problem, because, you know, you're crossing without documents, and we could talk about the complex and racist immigration history of this country, legal, etc. But he said, when I see this man's story, you know, I see him as a person, and not as, oh, one of those dirty brown people sneaking across our border. And I was so touched by that, because I thought, you know what, here's a person who tends to have a negative opinion of those people. And if he can start to come around, then this storytelling can have a real effect. And so let's not just do, Europeans coming here and, semi-tan looking Central Americans coming here. Let's tell the Asian story. Let's tell the African story, and just really show that, anyone, all we want is, the chance to work hard and make it, and to improve the life for our kids.
So the storytelling, the narrative as a vehicle for creating commonality, or at least building rapport that could lead to recognizing commonality. So have we as a society then developed a difficulty, or have we developed a do we find it difficult to tell stories? Did we tell more stories in the past? I don't know. I'm looking at a snapshot of today, and it feels like these stories aren't told as much as they may have to be told, I guess.
I think the secret is, and probably one of the things that got you into, hey, let's have a talk show, is that you, Chaps, are profoundly curious. And if you're curious, like, how does your life work? How does this work? What does it mean to give up all of your possessions and put a funny second language in your mouth, and all of these changes and challenges? If you can be curious about that and ask people, they're glad to tell you. I mean, our favorite topic is the person sitting in our blue jeans, right? And so, just think about being curious, and people will share their stories, and then ask follow-up questions, and then you get to really know people and appreciate who they are and what they do, what they believe, and that's on. Then you're on the cusp of something I call relationship.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
I had an interesting interaction last night with I was taken through a process of telling people what we do as interculturalists. And we're all about answering this question about when people say, what do you do for a living? And we say, well, interculturalists. And then it goes off into some tangent about trying to explain just what we do, right? It can be many faceted. People do different things in the framework of being an interculturalist.
Sure.
But it was then I was asked to explain it, not through the terms of what I do, but the problem I solve. And that was a whole different framework. And it really made me think. So and then it came into doing exactly, the person that was taking me through this said, when you tell people you solve a problem, then they're going to be curious. And they're going to ask you more, right? And they're going to say, well, I asked you what you did, but you said you solved this problem. Okay, how and why, and all this kind of thing. So I think it kind of connects to that in how we interact with people that are from different backgrounds, right?
Absolutely.
What was the problem that now it doesn't have to be a problem, but what was the problem that you were trying to solve when you had to move from your country, especially if it's not by choice, as a refugee or something? And that problem is that I want to live. I want to care for my family. There are many people in this world that have this problem of just pure survival. So I thought that was a good analogy, and I thought it's great. I'm about to talk to Alan tomorrow, and I thought I wanted your perspective on how that line of questioning changes the framework of someone's understanding when they listen to it, to say, oh, so I can identify, I can put myself in the shoes of a person who is just solving the problem of just pure survival.
Sure. And I was smiling early on when this conversation came about, because Christian, a number of years ago, had a lovely cartoon posted on his various social media about, oh, you're an interculturalist. What do you do? So, I don't know if you put that in your show notes, but that's that. But basically, I build bridges. I help people connect. And for me, it's often this intercultural, because truly, interculturalist does not fall off the tongue of most people. Like, and if you ask little kids, what do you want to be? Oh, I want to be an astronaut, or a prima ballerina, or a football player, etc. Interculturalist is not in the top, 100, 200. What is that? And so what I find is often the entree to this whole conversation is a manager at a company says, we've got this really great guy from, Brazil or Jordan, and you're really smart and just great analyst or whatever. But when he gives a presentation, I can't understand him, right? And so it's focusing on the language, the how he presents, not inside. And so I'll often get called in for consultations on fixing the language problem. But then I'll also find out that that he has other behaviors, or looking at his emails, ways of writing that are potentially insulting just because we don't say that, or we don't say it that way, or we don't physically touch or interact in the same way here in the U.S. And so that is often a byproduct that's intercultural training.
And in my experience, the very examples that both of you just gave, I had this conversation earlier this morning with a potential client, or fingers crossed, very soon a new client. It's a mid-sized company with some 300 employees, and they are based in Europe, and they have a presence in the Greater Toronto, Canada area, and they're sending an expatriate to replace somebody who's going back to Europe. And I asked them, so how many cultural competency courses or trainings or initiatives have you done in the past for your expatriate population? And they said 0. And I said, so what was the reason for not doing that? And they said, well, we always kind of figured it out ourselves. And so I said, all right, great. So what made you talk to me then, if you've been able to figure it out yourself in the past? Well, we recognize that we didn't do such a great job at figuring it out ourselves. So this is when a client basically sells themselves because they recognize their problem. I think in our industries, I don't know how it is for you, but it happens to me quite a bit that I find myself selling the problem. Or, I mean, I should put this in quotation marks, that I have to make potential clients aware that there is the problem. They weren't able to put their fingers on it yet. They knew something was off, but they hadn't found the root cause of the issue yet. And explaining what we do, or explaining the problem that we solve, is often when the light bulb comes on. Yeah, exactly. And we've had this like 5 times before that. All right, then let's work on that. Let's show you how you can fix this going forward, right?
Absolutely. And as both of you know, and people in our industry know, if an expatriate assignment fails, the company is losing hundreds of thousands of dollars, because it is expensive to pick somebody up and their family and their furniture and resettle them across the globe and get them plugged into systems and maybe get the kids into private schools or whatever. It's a really expensive proposition. And so if that international transfer fails, then they got to move back home and then move somebody else, and it's super costly. And so the investment in cross-cultural training and language training is really a drop in the bucket, and makes the assignment, the international assignment, the expat assignment, much more successful. And it truly, if the worker the worker may be happy, but the trailing spouse or the kids, if they're not happy, then the hiree or the transferee is not going to be happy, because he or she is going to be miserable every time they come home from lovely day at work, but then unhappiness and not fitting in, and etc. And so how can you make this work for the whole family so that the assignment really works? And so that's problem solving. And especially, as you say, small companies, they don't have the resources, the staff necessarily. And if they don't do a ton of this, then just like one expat every couple of years, and then they rotate. Yeah, so for Suzuki-san, he had some struggles, but he kind of made it. But if you were to talk with them about their satisfaction, they weren't happy because they didn't feel, guided, didn't feel shepherded, didn't feel included.
And we just had an episode earlier this week on Tuesday with Stephanie, who is the general manager for global mobility in an organization that is well known around the world for moving stuff, UPS. So if you haven't watched that live, folks, go back in the archives, our Tuesday episode with Stephanie Owens from UPS, where she admitted that this is costly. So this is not only a sales pitch from people like us. So you will hear it from the horse's mouth if you go back watching that episode, that a big global organization that is in the moving stuff business recognizes that moving people has some additional challenges, and if they're not met or if they're not addressed, then it will be a costly endeavor to untie all of this. I will never forget this example. I met a family that could be considered a failed expatriate assignment. They were not my clients, but I was witnessing how it unfolded for them. And this is when my wife and I, when our family were still living in Tennessee, my wife was deeply involved in running her Montessori school up in Tennessee. And there were quite a few expatriate parents who had sent or are still sending their kids to that school. And there was this family from Central Europe, and the husband was the expatriate, and he was, in his organization, the only person that the company was able to send on that assignment. They didn't have a pool of people that they could choose from. They said, tag, you're it, because we need you over there. And he was excited about it. He was like, this is a career move. This is an opportunity for me to prove myself and show what I'm capable of. And the problem was that this whole scenario wasn't really dealt with in his family, and his wife was not happy from the get-go. Back in Europe, they lived in an old farm building out of town in a rural environment, and now she was thrown into the suburban environment in the United States. And she was unhappy because her language skills were lacking, and she was genuinely dissatisfied with her whole domestic situation, and that reflected on the kids. So I saw this mom, this expatriate mom, bring her little kids to school in the morning as they were saying goodbye, handing over the children to the educators. And she was talking the negativity into the kids, her negative feelings she was projecting onto her own children. Yeah, don't worry about it. It won't be as bad. And all of this, instead of lightening up the mood, she was basically depressing it with her own negativity that she's been harboring for weeks and then months. And the company finally decided this isn't going to go well, because her husband comes to work worried about the well-being of his family and the mental health situation of his wife. They had to prematurely abort this assignment, cost them tens of thousands of dollars. So this is just one example that I had not the pleasure, but the privilege of experiencing. It was not a pleasant sight. It didn't do well for the relationship. The kids didn't do well. And all these benefits that you might envision from an expatriate assignment. The kids learn a new language. They learn to adjust to new situations. You deal with adversity, blah, blah, all the benefits you could potentially have, and you will have if you have a guided, structured expatriate assignment. None of that materialized for them because they were ill-advised and ill-selected, and the company afterwards recognized, we need to change this. We need to prep our people better than that.
Yeah, it's all about finding your place to fit in into the new community, and that can be really hard if you don't know the system, you don't know what's available, and then you just feel isolated, and you're just staring at your four walls if you're not the one going out to work every day. And so I would find often when again I'm originally given assignment that the manager thinks is largely linguistic. But I'll end up asking, how's your spouse doing? How are your kids doing? And, what activities are you doing? And ending up, just because the human resources at this small to medium-sized company, they just don't have a lot of experience. And in fact, they've never traveled abroad or never spoken a second language. And so they're just, I don't know, just send them the employee manual and they'll figure it out.
Yeah, figure it out.
Yeah, and that's not the case. And so I end up making recommendations and well, have you found the Asian food store? And if not, and I know that town, here you can go there and then make these connections. And so it's all of those connections. And I wanted to ask both of you, what makes the U.S. work for you? So Christian, I think you sort of fell in love as a high school student when you were an exchange student, and then came back. So you kind of knew what you were getting into, and you beefed up your English skills, and so a lot of that was not so difficult for you. Brett, you speak natively a form of English, and so that's
some form of English. He still struggles, but
one
he gets by.
valid, recognized variety thereof. And so, other than a charming conversation of, oh, isn't that a cute accent or something, you're communicating mostly. Obviously, there are some cultural differences between Aussies and us. But for each of you, what makes belonging happen for you? How do you experience belonging? Because you're not packing up and leaving. You're staying here, right?
Well, Brett, I'm going to let you answer that first.
Well, my original landing here in this country was going to be fairly temporary, at least for 12 months or so, and that was 20 years ago. And I met a Polish girl here in Chicago, and the rest is history. So, and that's great, and it's worked out perfectly. I could never dream of the position I'm in now, but it's. I think that I get asked this a lot, strangely enough, and probably more often by people that are born in this country that say they know I come from Australia, and they say, why would you come here? Why do you stay here? And I say, well, yeah, that's it. Why does it come from people like that? And so I think that I want to be here. I want to be here. My business is here. My family, at least my immediate family, my wife and one of my daughters is here. So we stay here, but I also want to, I'm comfortable here, certainly. Not that I'm all about comfort, but it is a place where I think that I want to push back against the self-consciousness of the American psyche that I find exists and is quite sad, is that this is a wonderful country. It's full of wonderful people. And yet even people that are born here have this stereotype about themselves, is that there's a negative stereotype about the people from this country. And that's driven by media and that kind of thing. So I guess that's what keeps me here, and of course drives me in the work that I do. In trying to answer that question for other people I work with that come here, that say, what they ask me, what do you find good about it? If I'm coming now to live as an expat in the US, what do I need to look for in the positive side of things to make my family whole and well and a sense of well-being?
So the original very short answer for what created belonging for you was love. Absolutely,
yeah, but and also the love of somebody who wasn't born here either, right? Her experience was that immigrant experience that was mentioned before, with $100 in the pocket at age 19. My wife landed here not speaking English at all, and so
you speak a fair amount of Polish in Chicago.
Well, this is the other thing. Polish is a very kind of like a common second language here. So yes, our grocery store here is fully Polish speaking. We have Polish speaking schools, so it's great for our daughter. It's a great connector outside of the culture. I'm not sure. This is probably maybe another thing, and I've answered it this way. I probably am more comfortable here that I'm not married to an American. Nothing wrong with Americans, but it scratches that itch even in my everyday interactions to see the cultural differences that are now being formed and nurtured in my daughter from the perspective of both me and my wife coming together. So a family of 3 different accents, 3 different mindsets, and this little cake we're baking here with the ingredients from both. It's a really fun experience. So to me, that's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for me, as you were talking about this, I was thinking, well, when did I feel like it belonged? And there were times when this feeling came on and it went. So there were times when I already felt like I belonged, and then the belonging curve went down again for some reason. The short answer for me would be having friends, and friends in a definition that matches with my cultural wiring. I tell our clients, especially in the German-speaking, English-speaking context that we deal with quite a bit, that there is a false friend or a false equivalence that some draw linguistically, that the American word or the American English word of friend is not exactly synonymous with the German translation, which is Freund, which is almost the same spelling, but Freund and friend don't mean the same thing in these two different cultures. So when I recognize that I have friends that match my German definition of friend, that's when I felt like it belonged. And that took a while. Especially as I came here as an adult, making close friendships that are intimate and deep and involved at an age 30 plus is different than when you do that at age 15, right? So it took me a little bit. And then when we moved to Atlanta, where I currently live, we decided to move into a neighborhood that is predominantly African American, where a lot of people that we talked to prior said, why would you do that? Don't move there. Have you checked the crime rates? Did you look at the school zones and their ratings and all these other, all these minor and not so minor racist infractions that people come with, and they were loading it onto us, which made our decision to move into a Black neighborhood even more solid, and we did it. And sure, did I feel like a foreigner here or like a stranger here, because people gave us certain looks, and it was obvious that these white folks, they're new to the neighborhood. That was obvious. And yet the conversations quickly happened, and neighbors find out, okay, they might be white folks, but they're not American white folks. Okay, let's talk a little more. And when I knew that I belonged was when our family went to a trip back to Europe a couple of years ago. And we came back home after like 3 weeks, and we come from the airport, get our suitcases out of the car, and I look at my front yard, and the grass was freshly cut. And I was like, this is weird. I didn't ask the lawn care company to come by. So probably they did anyway. Let me call them and make sure they get paid. And as we are still unloading the car, I see my neighbor from across the street, I would say a middle-aged African-American woman living by herself with her dog. And hey, neighbors, you're back, and blah, 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 and small talk. Oh, and by the way, Christian, I cut your grass. And I said, Angela, that is awesome. Thank you. And I didn't ask you to. What made you do that? And she said, well, I have my lawnmower out. I was doing my yard, and yours looked like shit. And I thought I'd better do that. And didn't cost me much time. So I thought and that's when I knew that we had arrived.
So it's about being a neighbor. You know, what does it mean to be a neighbor? What is
Mr. Rogers?
A neighborhood?
Yeah. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, that was going to be my question, Alan, because, you've turned the question on us before I got a chance to ask it, because I wanted to ask, in all these wonderful interviews you've done, was there 2 or 3 common threads that you found that you heard from the people you spoke to in what made them belong, and that they could learn from, that other people could learn listening to the show, and perhaps people that lived in the community could practice by by helping people belong? Is there any? What are some of those things that you noticed in your interviews?
So the answer is as varied as the individual. So 200 people, 200 different answers. I had actually the one that touched me maybe deepest, and if you know me, my wife can tell you I'm a fairly sappy guy, and so a touching movie, a touching song or story or poem, and I'm the waterworks. So I may get a little verklempt if I start telling the story. I was talking with this Chinese professor at the local university, and I said, what is belonging for you? And he said, so Grand Rapids is a big enough community that there's a large Chinese community, and that the Chinese kids who are born here, they're quickly separating from the original culture. So you like it or not, kids, your parents are sending you on Saturday morning to Chinese school, right? You're getting Chinese language, and you're learning the calligraphy and and culture. And so they have a Chinese school and a Chinese association connected to that. And he said, you know what we did? We joined, the Chinese Association joined the Adopt a Highway program. And down by on 84th Street, we have a 2-mile stretch of road. And there's a sign up that says, you know, Chinese Association of Grand Rapids. And he says, every time I drive by there, he says, this is our street. Mm-hmm. You know, we're responsible. This is our piece of ground. And I love that story because, you know, it was actually grounded in, you know, physical, the tierra, the being here. And but other people, a Brazilian fellow I interviewed, he said the local meat market. So I don't know if you know Brazilians or been to Brazil, but they're fairly big carnivores. And
yes.
Barbecue is a major deal. And they will quickly tell you there's a huge cultural and physical difference between barbecuing on one hand and American grilling, right?
Right.
Which is sort of casual and quick and get it over with. It's a cultural event. And I lived in Brazil and had a chance to go to a churrasco. And, you know, it's often segregated by gender. So the men are around the barbecue and the chef, the grill master is, you know, doing all the different meats and the chicken hearts but then cutting little pieces for people to try. And then the women are making the salads inside. But this sense of extended community around a large fire and meat at various stages and sizes and tastes, you know, getting cooked. And so if you like Brazilian barbecue, the best cut of meat in my mind is the picanha. Well, American butchers don't cut beef the way Brazilians do. But the local meat market, they actually had a butcher shop in his town. And he went there and said, hey, you know, can you cut the beef this way? And they did. And then they actually started ordering this special kind of beef and cutting it so that all the Brazilians, and like at the time, 60 Brazilian families in this town, knew that if they went to Lalonde's market, they could get real picanha.
Right.
So then you can go shopping and bring home something for the weekend barbecue. And it's like, this is real food. And my local store, even though, you know, if you ask, you know, 99 Americans out of 100, what is picanha? They have no idea. This store is accommodating that.
I'll be there in a little bit, right? Let me hop in the car, Alan. All right. This reminds me of something because I may have told this story in another episode. Not this past year, but the year before, 2019, Thanksgiving. My parents, they're in their 70s, came visit us here in Atlanta for the first time, and we have a tradition in our neighborhood. We're in a quite international part of the city. So a lot of non-Americans living here. So we don't have the tradition of Thanksgiving. It's not our natural holiday. So we have something what we call Friendsgiving. And it's usually hosted by my neighbor, Eddie, who is Belgian, also Congolese. And there's like United Nations every time. And before COVID, there were like 50 people at this party. And we were spit grilling an entire lamb. And I told them, well, my parents are coming in. My father was a butcher in his active days. We had a family-owned butcher shop, and they were like, he'll cut the meat. All right, good. So my dad, who doesn't speak English, all we gave him was an apron, a knife, and something to sharpen the knife. And I told my dad, you don't know these people, get to work. And so he did. He had a blast. And
he belonged.
He belonged. Within 2 hours, he was conversing with everybody, especially with a French gentleman. My dad doesn't speak French at all. And this French guy who lives in the neighborhood, he still asks about my dad.
Yeah.
Right. So food or having a communal meal and having the rituals around it can be a magnificent vehicle to create that sense of belonging.
Yeah, but to go back to Brett's earlier question, for everyone, it's really different. And what brings you comfort, what brings you ease, what brings familiarity, what gives you any sense of, yeah, I can do this here. I used an example, Suzuki-san earlier, a former client of mine who since repatriated to Japan was big into motorcycle racing. And he worked for an auto supply company, and he and all the company employees are motorheads. But he worked on his own and rebuilt a racing motorcycle, and then went across state lines through the U.S. entering in motorcycle races. And then all of his coworkers, when he would come back, they say, "Oh, Suzuki-san, how'd you do in last week's race?" And he actually won some regional races. And so here his connection is, I love motorcycles. I did it in Japan. I can do it here. But it's like finding that place for you. And sometimes you just need somebody initially to say, "Oh, here's the Michigan Motorcycle Club Racing Association," right. and then you're off to the races.
I want to make sure that our audience also feels like they belong, so let me bring them up again. Here is our friend Chris Lauterbach in Prosper, Texas. Chris, I didn't know you were. I knew you were in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, but Prosper I hadn't heard of. Now we know Prosper, Texas, just north of Dallas. Chris is, I believe, also in the global mobility field, if I'm not mistaken. And then we have Sue over in Portland, Oregon, who is maybe still typing a comment to finish off what she typed here. Who knows? Maybe she's just prompting us to talk more about this. And here we have a viewer on YouTube, Caroline Sales Gomil. I hope I'm pronouncing it properly because she's a native German. So I'm suspecting the Sales part is German, but Gomil, who knows? And she says she lived in the US for 10 years, returned to Germany a year and a half ago, and still feels very much emotionally attached to the US. Well, happy to hear that. So she always has two places to call home. This is an interesting facet of this. So does the concept of what is home change for those of us who've lived abroad? What do you call home, Alan? What's home for you?
So the less exposure we have, the less comfort we have with difference. And so if all you associate with, the only people you talk to are people who look like you, act like you, believe like you, worship like you or don't worship, etc., then that is your small world. But if you get exposed at an early age, like I did, my grandparents took me back to the old country when I was 12, and that just opened me up to, holy cow, there are other ways of thinking and doing things, and your world won't come crashing, and it just makes you more curious. And the more curious you get, I think that you lose the limitations, you lose the inhibitions, and you're glad to ask questions, you're glad to stretch out and, okay, let me put some weird food in my mouth, or let me, try, acting in different ways, or hanging out with people. And so for me, if I go to a reception with 100 people, the last person I want to talk to is an old white guy, because, I know a lot of their experiences and thoughts. And, but if you're wearing a turban or a bindi or a kaftan, you probably have some more interesting things to say and life experiences that I need to hear about. So let's get curious and lose the discomfort, because that's where the growth is, and that's frankly where the interesting part is.
I must say, Alan, I've made a big blunder in this area, because I get that idea of I don't want to engage with people who look like me. The bias is that it's going to be a boring conversation. But of course, you and I could sit in a coffee shop if we didn't know each other and across the room, and I would probably walk by you, but yet you are a fascinating person who has lived in many different countries and could offer me some insights in that. So, and this happened to me. I did it in a meeting with some leadership team people that I was with, and I just said we really are missing diversity in this organization. And I used the term, I'm just sick of sitting around with other middle-aged white people like me. And quite rightly, one of the ladies there got kind of rather offended and explained to me that, well, that kind of is not a really nice thing to say, because I speak 3 different languages and I've lived in 3 different countries, and I have a husband from another background. So what is it about me that you have this reverse bias against? So that really brought me home. So I get that, and I've been warned about this kind of reverse bias of saying, so I am like you. I look at somebody who looks or maybe look like they pray differently or sound different, and I'm drawn towards it. But then I've got to check that, right? I've got to say, well, maybe not too much. There's fascinating people who look like me, because obviously I'm one of them, right? People, and if I didn't open my mouth, I could be American. But as soon as I do, I get this barrage of, oh my God, I love your accent. How
that's what's going to draw people into the conversation with you.
Yeah, so I have a privilege that gives me an additional privilege of having people that are interested and curious about me. So yeah, and I love the food thing. I just wanted to bring up, we had an experience with a local butcher here, a traditional butcher, which is very rare here in the US, a butcher shop, a guy that actually cuts the meat every day. I went in there and I asked him for pork belly, and he kind of looked at me like I had my ears on backwards. He said, "Why would you want pork belly?" And I said, "Well,
because it's good."
In Australia, we have pork belly. It's like a delicacy in restaurants. You pay a lot of money for this stuff, right? And it's actually because we have this Asian fusion, and the Asians, Thai people eat pork belly. It's wonderful. And he said, "Oh, I guess I could find it for you." And I went, "Yeah, well, give me a call, Kevin, And he called me a couple of days later. He said, "I found it." He was very happy. He said, "I found it." And I said, "Great." And he said, it'll be here Saturday. I went, "Perfect. I'll come and pick it up." Well, I went into the store and he had this huge roll wrapped up in white paper. It was huge. And I said, "How much did you order?" And he said, "Well, I ordered pork belly. It was the whole belly thing, rolled up in a big, like a huge roll. So even with the nipples still on it." And he said, and I said to him, "Man," I said, "well, it'll take me a year to cook all this." And he said, I said, "But that doesn't matter." And I said, "Well, how much do I owe you?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "Where I got it from gave it to me for free. And I've just kind of got it here." And I thought, and I said, "Well, I'll give you $30 for the whole thing." And he went, "Yeah, it sounds fair." It's like, but since then, he's actually gotten a few people from Asian backgrounds, so he's asked them about this, and they go, "Oh, you can get me pork belly? Absolutely, get me pork belly."
And he opened up a new line of business for this guy.
New line of business. He's not making a lot of money. It's not high margin, this pork belly. But
have you eaten all of it? Can I come by and get the rest, or is it?
No, we didn't get through it. I brought it home and I cut it into pieces, and I've cooked it for different people that don't know what pork belly is, and they go, "Pork belly?" And I went, "Yeah, just look, it's just bacon with extra fat." But it was a great experience, and everybody, of course, pork belly is like crack. So But
in this process, your butcher, helped this butcher create an extra level of belonging, inclusion.
Right, yeah, and we have many different. We have a huge Asian community here, and they buy other things off him. But it's just that one extra thing that he said, "Wow, so there's a whole other market that he's attracted." So it's fascinating, just the accidental interactions, the cultural interactions you can have when you open your mind and try and hope that you're looking for belonging yourself, but by accident you offer belonging to other people.
Right. Yeah. And I know, Christian, you're probably looking at the clock thinking you have to wrap up soon, but I wanted to go back just for a moment to what Brett said about making judgments, like, writing off, white guys, white males. And there's a profound lesson here that, just because the three of us work in cross-cultural communication doesn't mean that we don't have our own blinders, that we have to practice, peeling back or ripping off, because we all do it. We're human, we're fallible, and we make judgments and stupid decisions. So we're open, and sharing our personal stories, I think, can open other people up to the same learning.
I agree.
Great.
I agree. Valid point, Alan. Valid point. All right, folks, if you want to find what Alan does, and if you want to check this Feel Like You Belong out, here is where you go. We already put it in the comment or in the chat window, or whatever it is on your social, whether you're watching this on YouTube or on LinkedIn or on Facebook. you'll find it. It's here on screen. It's down somewhere here or to the side, or whatever it looked like on your device. You figure this out. You're old enough. You found this, then you know how to navigate it. We already talked about this earlier this week, but we do still want to remind you of it again. Brett and I are continuing to explore this new platform called Clubhouse. So if you're in the club, join us in the Clubhouse. We're going to do another discussion, an open forum, so to say, next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Or for those of you time zone challenge people, there's an app for that. Just type it in your phone. It's like 7 p.m. Central Europe, and I don't know, the next day in Australia, as we all know. So always tomorrow in Australia. So join us on Clubhouse next Wednesday, and keep us in good memory over the weekend, because unfortunately we're not doing the show on Saturdays and Sundays. So this
a monster.
Say what?
You're not a monster.
No, we're not. We're gonna keep your weekend sane. The insanity is only during the weekdays. Alan, thank you very much for joining us. This was a pleasure as always. Once travel becomes safe again, I can't wait to get up to Michigan, especially to Grand Rapids, because I haven't tried all the beers of Grand Rapids yet, and there are
City USA 2 years running.
There you go.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. This was Two Chaps, Many Cultures, episode 145. I'm still shaking my head in disbelief at how many we've done already. Crazy must we be. Enjoy your weekends, everybody. This is Two Chaps, Many Cultures. This is Brett. This is Alan. And I'm Christian. And we all wish you a very happy weekend. See you on Monday.
See you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Christian.